Linux Action Show is created by Jupiter Broadcasting. It's sponsored by Ting. Go to last.ting.com to save off your first device or plan. And DigitalOcean. Go to digitalocean.com and use the promo code Here's the Thing, all one word like you're slurring it, and spin up your own Linux rig for free. And Linux Academy. Go to linuxacademy.com/unplugged and invest in your mind while saving some money. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Linux Action Show, episode 426. My name is Chris.
My name is Noah.
Hello there, Noah. Good to be back with you after
Welcome back.
a couple of weeks, too, which is like the longest I've ever been away from the big show. So
I'm super happy that all I have to do is stand here today.
Well, thank you, sir, for filling in.
Such a relief.
Thank you very much to Wes and Ryan, too. You guys were great, especially for all the behind-the-scenes stuff that you worked on with Noah on. That was all very awesome. So thank you guys very much. I appreciate that. It's good to be back, though, because we have a big show this week. Coming up on this week's episode of the Linux Action Show, it's our review of Linux Mint 18. Have they fixed those security woes that we heard so much about? Have they implemented something great in the new version? And what about that Mint Y theme? We'll give you our thoughts on the current state of Linux Mint 18 and the Cinnamon desktop. Did you try out the Mate desktop at all?
Nope.
Or are you a Cinnamon man? Oh, we're doing a deep dive into the Cinnamon version of Mint 18. And then in the news segment, you heard it. It's true. The Ubuntu Linux forums were hacked. Microsoft has dropped the Holy Skype for Linux. We'll give you our quick takes on that. And No Maps has hit a dead end, as well as a PSA for Fedora users. And something's up crossover sleeve that could be a game changer. We've got the feedback coming up as well. But before all of that, Noah, do you know what we've got?
The picks!
That's right. We've got the picks. And check out this frickin' Ford Fusion that runs Linux thanks to a Raspberry Pi. And this bloke here has this setup via HDMI wired into his car's display system with GPS. He's just booting it up to go do, of course, what else? A little war driving. Look at that. It's right there on the nav screen. You can see the Raspberry Pi Linux booting up right there. And then it's a little garbly if you see it.
For anyone else planning on putting a Raspberry Pi in their Ford sync system, I don't know, of course, whatever ones have it. I think the screen is 800 by 400, or 480, sorry. So when the Raspberry Pi first boots up, it's got these overscan things. If you set them all to 0, it's pretty close. Don't go negative with the overscan top and bottom. The screen on my Raspberry Pi stopped booting up when I did that. So I have all zeros here, 800, 400. It's hard to read because
and the whole video's
perfect, but I'm not
about 11 minutes long, about 11 minutes and 4 seconds to be exact. And it's super cool to see him do this. And you know the thing that I secretly love about this, and it's not so secret. The sync system is a Microsoft system.
Yeah.
So
well, it was. I don't think the newer ones are.
But I don't care. Either if it may still be because of legacy reasons, or depending on your age of car, or what.
It's contaminated.
I don't know. The brand is tainted, and I love the idea of just washing it clean with a little Linux.
There are a couple of things that stand out to me. One is if we can get to a point where the car becomes a dumb vessel for input and basically he's connected the USB and the video component, and so then whatever you connect, be it a Raspberry Pi or whatever, you can fundamentally customize what you want your vehicle to do. And so I think it opens up a huge range of possibilities, whether it's playing Plex for the kids, or navigation or whatever. But I think it's neat that he has taken this and like it looks stock. It's not some hacked together thing, because he's using the actual stock screen in the car and the stock audio system.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. The other thing that I think is super cool about this, Noah, is this is just the tip of the iceberg. So this guy, of course, he's using it right now. He's going around doing a little war driving right now, which is, You
don't get video when you're not in park.
Oh, interesting.
There's a hack for that.
Either way, this is just the beginning, dude. This is just the beginning. Very soon he will, very soon all of us will have cars that have not just this, but many more components that can either be compromised themselves, as we've seen some of, or like in this case, which is super cool, just replaced. Right? You just do a little rewiring and you've completely replaced them. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Know
what I hate? I hate that the assumption of car manufacturers is that I'm going to watch video while driving. Yes,
yes, you are, dude.
I might be driving, okay, but I've got other people in the car, namely my 2 kids, that are not driving the motor vehicle, and it'd be really nice to use the entertainment system that's built into the vehicle. It drives me nuts that they, like, why is that not an option? Why isn't there a button that I can say I'm in the passenger seat, and maybe I have to do like constant math problems or something to prove that I don't know, but like, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, I hear you.
Have a weight sensor in the passenger. They already have that actually for the seatbelt thingy.
Yeah, the reality is too with tablets and cell phones. If you're really going to want to watch TV while you, or whatever it is, while you drive or YouTube or whatever, you could just do it with one of those. You could just do it. So Noah, something pretty cool has happened over at DigitalOcean this week. Let's mention them real quick. DigitalOcean is our first sponsor here on the Linux Action Show. Use our promo code Here's the Thing, all one word, like you're slurring it, to get a $10 credit. They have posted up, at least since I've been here, Noah, the official tutorial on how to use the block storage on DigitalOcean. This is something I have been waiting for. I am so super excited. I have it I just begun to have it set up because I only have, it's only available right now in like the NYC data center. In fact, they tell you in NYC and SFO2. And pretty much all of my droplets are in SFO1. I only have one droplet in NYC, and it's in production. So I've only just begun to look at it. But it actually turns out that is, in particular, out of all of them, probably the one I needed on the most. So that's a particular nice advantage, too. Have you had a chance to look at it?
Yeah, a little bit. I haven't had a chance to really play with it. And the other thing is, too, is I have found other creative solutions to get around the storage problem. So I have to wait for a time when I'm redoing something, and then I'll be forced to figure it out. Yeah,
there's that too. But so DigitalOcean is a great platform to get started to host your own Linux rig up on their super great infrastructure. They have 40 gigabit E connections into the hypervisors. They all run on KVM, which is on Linux, and SSDs are the disk everywhere. It doesn't matter which pricing you get, which plan you get. That's what you'll get. Also, something that's super nice about DigitalOcean is we talk a lot about it in a monthly capacity, but really, if you think about it, it's compute on demand that's charged hourly, really. So a $10 credit means you could go run one of their very high-end machines for however long that $10 lasts you, and then shut it down. You could also then, of course, run a rig for 2 months for free if you use the promo code Here's the Thing. Whatever you're looking at, if you want to try setting up the next version of Nextcloud, if you want to play around with Mumble, or in my case, if you want to build a quasi-core server and something with sync thing running on it, which is exactly where I could use more block storage, DigitalOcean's a great candidate for that. If you're learning, DigitalOcean is a great place to go experiment because you can snapshot and restore when you need to. They have a lot of different distributions to choose from, and they have really great documentation, as well as completely assembled application stacks or just bare machines. It's a great setup over at DigitalOcean.com. Just use the promo code Here's the Thing and grab a data center all over the world. DigitalOcean.com. Thanks, DigitalOcean, and congrats on launching that block storage. It's funny, we were talking about Raspberry Pis on the pre-show. I have a Raspberry Pi that is just come back to me recently that was doing a job that we were testing on. And I've been trying to think about what to do with it. And the kids seem to be, was it you I was talking about? The kids, I don't remember who I was talking to. No, it was my buddy John. My kids freaking love Nintendo games. Classic Nintendo games. And this week, Nintendo announced that they're relaunching like a little mini NES that comes with 30 ROMs pre-installed. And
HDMI.
Yeah, and HDMI with no internet connection, but that's probably a good idea. That's kind of a neat thing. I wouldn't mind grabbing that, but I know I could accomplish this task with open source. And so that is where our desktop app pick comes. It's recallbox.com, the joy of replaying and re-experiencing. It's a free and open source OS to get you going on a wide selection of console emulators so you can play pretty much anything from NES's, Mega Drive, some of the later 32-bit platforms like PlayStation. It comes with Kodi built in. Recallbox also serves as a media center, so it's a media center and a retro console gaming system, so you don't have to sit there and bounce between softwares. It can connect to your home network. It can stream videos from any compatible NAS or external hard drive. It's got a pretty straightforward UI where you select the emulator and then it shows you all of the different ROMs available for that. I used to have something like this on a hacked Xbox, actually. And Noah, if you're watching this right here, this is the UI itself, and you choose the banners, and then that launches the emulator. And then once you go into there, it brings up like all of the ROMs you have for that particular environment. So it's really easy to use with a remote control environment, and it has a really straightforward UI that like our kids, even though they're on the younger end, would really have no problem navigating this. The other nice thing is it displays the artwork for the ROM, so you just can pick by picture, really. So it really can't get any simpler than this. Recallbox.
the nice thing about stuff like this is it's running, or can run anyway, on hardware that they're already familiar with, right? So Dylan can run it already on his laptop that he's already used to using. He's just running a different game.
That is very true.
If you need a dedicated machine, I'm sure you could run it on something like a Pi, right?
Yeah, that's exactly the idea. Is they're targeting for the Raspberry Pi, so that way it's a really easy, simple, straightforward approach that'd work great for kids or for adults alike. So it's pretty cool. They have 30,000 compatible games. It can handle up to 4 players. It emulates 30 different systems with infinite hours of playability, they say. It can do screenshots.
I still think I'm buying that NES, though.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, all right. It can save states, so you can pause it. So some of those old games, there was no save, like Ghouls and Goblins or whatever. Rewind playback is kind of cool. Screenshots, supports wireless controllers, and you can get online. They promise easy updates for the different emulators. It's a nice package. So if you don't want to, if you don't want to buy that NES thing, or you want to play way more systems than that NES thing supports, recallbox.com, and we have a video of it in action in the show notes if you guys want to check that out. Looks pretty cool. All right, spotlight time, Noah. And this guy, it's a little new. It's a little fresh. It's a little raw. In fact, it's a little fresh and so raw that we demoted it from desktop pick to spotlight. The idea being desktop pick is something you could go get your hands on and feel safe using right now. Spotlight is more of a, hey guys, there's an open source project out there we think you might like to know about. Just go find out more and keep your eye out for it. And that's where Felony comes in. Felony is a really slick, brand new approach to encrypted chat. It is really nice. In fact, they have a little example here of chatting, and you can see the UI is very simple. It's a PGP app that's supposed to be easy for everyone. They have security plus to the greatest extreme. As they say, you add public keys to your buddies list, and a public key is like a username. You add someone's public key to your buddies list, and it lets you send them messages. How about that? You can encrypt a message, you select a recipient from your buddies list, and then you compose a message. How about that? And you can send those encrypted messages anywhere. You can run it locally, you can run it everywhere. It's all built, probably, I think, around Ruby or something. So there you go. Felony. And the thing that really attracts me to anything like this, and I don't actually know if this, for all I know, could never go anywhere. Could be kind of a joke. But I love the idea of something that makes using encryption almost completely invisible, and you're not, and yet somehow you're not really compromising on the quality of that encryption. An example of something kind of that gets near this is N1, Nihilus N1, the mail client that we talked about on the recent Linux Unplugged, is integrating support for Keybase, so that way you can do PGP encrypted, GPG encrypted emails to anyone on Keybase, sort of back and forth. Now, you can say what you want about Keybase, whatever. I happen to like it. But the idea of making GPG encryption a couple of clicks away, and then the experience being a very modern, nice-looking experience that's cross-platform, that always gets my attention. That's why Felony sort of showed up on the radar for me. It's not really packaged up. It's not really production quality software. And with anything that you would actually use for serious private communications, you should be waiting for something that's vetted, that has years under its belt, and maybe even has bounties out there to find flaws in it. That is sort of the criteria I would use for something that's serious like this. But for something that you're just kind of curious about, something that might go somewhere someday, something that might be an up-and-comer, you can check it out. It's called Felony. Go offline. Become invisible. Or if you want to do the opposite of be invisible, become a superstar, Coder Radio has a coding challenge starting next episode. In fact, you can check out last week's, was it last week? No, it was the week before last week. Noah was the co-host on Coder Radio. And now in episode 214, we're launching a brand new coding challenge with actual giveaways, with award points going towards creative solutions, easily understood solutions, performance, general coolness. It's all going to be integrated into the Coder Radio program. And we have a couple different challenges for you. You'll find out more in 214.
Michael Dominic was sharing with me how System 76 and Linux has saved him from Apple and Mac OS X.
Yeah, and that episode, I listened to that episode after the fact. It was actually really great. Find out about his new rig and all that stuff. So yeah, if you guys want to know more about the coding challenge, we'll have the link in the show notes. You can also go to coderradio.reddit.com, and it's linked up there. So check it out. And I'm spreading the word because I think that might be something that appeals to you guys. Yeah, and I thought you guys' conversation. In fact, for as much as he was kind of talking smack about MacBook hardware, you were surprisingly, yeah, you didn't really kind of bit your tongue. I was impressed. You didn't really.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you have a lot of room to talk.
What?
You have a lot. I listened to the last couple episodes of Coda Radio, Mr. Fisher, because I was trying to learn. And in there, Mr. Dominic's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna probably go with Ubuntu. And what do you say? Are you like, oh no, you gotta go with Arch, that LTS? No, you're like, yeah, I can see that has some legitimate uses in the business. And then he's like, well, what makes you think I'm not going to stick with the LTS for 5 years? And you're like, yeah, that'd be an option. I'm like, man, if I said that, if I was like, I'm going to stick.
Okay. All right.
You're mad at me when I stick with a distro for like 6 months. You're like, geez, that's out of date.
Please. Okay, so first of all, I think I did say that. You're right. But I also said, because he's doing development work, and stuff like that, and using it as a dev machine. But I believe I also said it greatly saddens me that Ubuntu will be your experience into Linux right now, because
your exact words were something along the lines of the effect of, I just want you to know that there's a better Linux experience out there, because I'm never excited anymore when somebody tells me their first experience on Linux is going to be Ubuntu.
Yeah, that is what I said.
But that said, that did not seem like the same amount of beratement I would get if I came on the show.
That's because, young man, you know better. You know better. You caught me. But to be fair, also it's it's his show. Just like when Alan's talking about how great BSD is. I don't usually say much.
Hey, you watch what you say about BSD today.
Oh yeah.
Defender of the BSD today. Yeah.
Oh, you are.
I am. Absolutely.
Boy, you should have seen the pre-show, because I did, I think, a fairly good takedown of one of the most common comparisons of BSD and Linux, and that is that BSD is created by a common team and shares the same goals, and documentation is amazing, and it's one big project. I did a little takedown of that. So if you are a patron, you could watch that. It's in the pre-show, but I'll save it because I know we have to get going on. I don't know what that was. That was
big. You said it's a big project. I mean, in comparison to the scope of Linux, like if BSD, if BSD had the same amount of users that Linux had, there would no longer be one big project with there would be a bunch of, it would diversify. There'd be a bunch of people that are like, no, this is the way we should do it. No, this is the way we should.
You're going to make me do this. Okay, here's what I'll just say. I'll just summarize it as this. The idea, oh God, I don't want to get in trouble. The idea, Alan's going to give me so much crap. The idea that BSD is superior because it's designed by one team with one vision implies that there is not a greater open source ecosystem in which BSD not only has to be involved in, but fundamentally relies upon in which to be relevant. The X project, the X11 has to run on BSD. There's many tools like, desktop environments that have to run on BSD that are created in this chaotic, ad hoc, GPL-fueled chaos. And yet somehow BSD still manages, they still work there. Like the whole concept that BSD is superior to Linux because it's created by a singular group of people with a singular vision falls apart because it has to participate in a wider ecosystem. And last but not least, and I'm sorry I'm off on track right now, but you got me going because this gets to me. The other thing is, it fundamentally underplays the role of the distribution. Because what is a distribution? A distribution is a singular project with a singular goal and a vision to curate and put together an operating system. So what it is it's comparing FreeBSD as a released product to Linux as a kernel with stuff added on top. And that it's not an apple to apples comparison. That's apples and oranges. What you have to compare FreeBSD to is something more like Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which has a singular vision, a singular group with great documentation and one particular vision. And that's what you,
its own OS. Yep.
And that's what you have to compare the entire FreeBSD stack to. So this whole myth that FreeBSD is superior because it's one singular thing is false. It has to participate in a wider, greater open source ecosystem where it still experiences that horrible chaos, and the distributions essentially do the same exact process, and they have to be involved in the wider ecosystem, but they're just not in denial about it. And then last but not least, I don't seem to remember any of us arguing that a monoculture is a technically superior thing and that we should all be advocating a monoculture, because the last time I asked OpenSSL, a monoculture is a super bad thing that leads to things like vulnerabilities like Heartbleed and non-competitiveness with other products out on the market. So I don't really, at the end of the day, I don't even really accept the fundamental argument that the monoculture is better. That's all the picks for this week. Let's do the news.
the news, and this episode is brought to you by
Ting.com. Won't you all go to last.ting.com? That supports the show and gets you a $25 discount off your first Ting device or plan. Now, the sale's over. I guess the CFO came back into the office and shut it down. But you got yourself a batch of Ting Sims. Like, how many Sims did you pick up?
A lot. I think
they were $1 with free priority shipping. $1 Sim. Now they're only $9 now, which is great because Ting has a great setup. It's only pay for what you use mobile, minutes, messages, megabytes, and that's it. You can grab a sim, and then when you're ready to activate it, it's $6 for the line, and then just your usage. Super great dashboard. Obviously, the best customer service in the business. There's Noah's pile. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, maybe? I think.
That sounds about right.
That's awesome.
You got to have a couple on hand in case you got to activate some devices. Yeah. And here's the other thing I need to combat. I need to combat all the people that are like, sometimes you run into excuses. I tell somebody about Ting and they'll say, well, I would switch, but there's no store here. And you know what? No problem. Let's activate right now. I got a sim for you. We'll sign you right up. We'll do it right here. I've done that more than once.
Yeah, you have. Yeah, you have.
It works out.
That's great. And it's nice, too, because, I can't remember. We talked about this, maybe your setup before, but I've mentioned it from time to time, too, and you should pick his brain about it. Chase has a really cool security setup with, like, a whole motion detection system and cameras, and he's got a Sim Ting in there. Boom. Ting Sim in there. Boom. He gets messages whenever something happens or when there's a certain amount of movement. And could you imagine having to pay even, like, $15, $20, $25, $30 a month for something?
Most of them.
That's
most of them. There's $20 a month.
Yeah,
and that's usually, there's a subscription fee for the alarm system, and then on top of that, you're paying for the GSM backup.
I've done those subscription systems too, and they start at $40, usually around $70 a month just for that. Yeah. All right. So before we get out of here, guess what? Kyra's back, and she's got an app pick of the week for us. So take it away, Kyra.
Data without giving up your regular routine.
All right.
I'm Kyra, and this is the Ting download.
Go, Kyra.
At Ting, we're all about saving you money, which is why we've become quite fond of Opera Max, a standalone application for Android phones. Max reroutes your incoming data through Opera servers, compresses it, and then sends it to your phone. This results in an average of 50% data savings. Launching the app is all that's required to start the optimization process. From now on, select apps will be compressed before reaching you. For instance, videos running on Instagram or YouTube.
All right.
Check out how much you're saving by returning to the app. These stats can be broken down by day or month. For best results, we recommend running the handy scanning process from the settings menu. This action will instantly let you know which installed apps on your smartphone will work with Opera Max. If an app is consuming too much data, you can deny it mobile access from the app management screen. And if you enable notifications, you can get numbers on your current savings.
That's neat.
While Opera Max doesn't support every app out there, the number of popular apps is quite compelling. Opera Max is free on Google Play for all Android smartphones. If you like this app, like this video, and we'll see you next time.
That's actually pretty cool, and I think they're kind of using like a VPN to do it, and that makes Opera the best browser for your porn ever. Route that through their servers, let them look at all that. That's actually a pretty cool app pick. The other thing, I noticed Google's starting to do that with Chrome. They're offering a service like this, and something that I've recently started taking advantage of is I got YouTube Red as being a Google Music subscriber, which I guess I accidentally did when they launched, and I use it from time to time. But the thing I'm actually liking a lot more is it comes with YouTube Red. And YouTube Red, you just go right in the mobile app, and you can just download YouTube videos right to your local phone storage and watch them offline. So just do that over Wi-Fi. It's really cool. So anyways, last.ting.com, and a big thank you to Ting for sponsoring the Linux Action Show, and thanks to you guys for visiting that page. That keeps us going. Even if you just want to go to the blog and read more about Ting, about their fiber internet, or from some of their other app picks, visiting last.ting.com first supports the show. Lets Ting know you visited and gets you that credit or a little bit of money off a device if you decide to pull the trigger. And they have a savings calculator you can go through and just see how much you would save. This first story I want to cover this week because it probably applies to a good amount of our audience, and maybe that's why it's seeing so much attention online. But I don't think so. This has gone crazy. There's dozens of videos that are posted every few minutes online. G+ is freaking out over this Ubuntu Forums hack. And the way I read it, it doesn't seem particularly bad. I guess the numbers are big. That's one reason it's getting attention. 2 million user accounts potentially compromised. The online forum was the only piece of infrastructure, however. No other Ubuntu websites, repo, or other information was taken. Canonical GEO Jane says that we are able to confirm that there had been exposure of data, and we shut down the forums as a precaution. Deeper investigation revealed that there was a known SQL injection vulnerability in the Form Runner add-on in the forms, which had not been patched. A damn form add-on, Noah. The attacker was able to download portions of the user table, which contained usernames, email addresses, and IPs for 2 million users. But Canonical stresses that the attacker was not able to gain access to valid user passwords. But people are talking about this like it's huge. But it does, once again underscore potentially a soft spot in the open source ecosystems. While the forums were offline, Canonical cleaned and rebuilt the servers and installed the latest vBulletin form software and reset all the system and database passwords. Any thoughts, Noah?
Not so much, except for that any of the services that I use, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the feedback segment. There are fundamental things that I have to use on a day-to-day basis, and for those things, I have a password that I use or a iteration on a password scheme that I use. For things like forms that I'm visiting when I have a problem, or if I'm trying to look for something specific, for those kinds of things, man, is it ever important to have just a one-off password? Because it is a little bit more trouble, even if you're using something like KeePassX, where you have to go into a separate piece of software to look up the password to sign into that account. But at the same time, if it's not something you're using on a daily basis, just make it a one-off password. I have one-off passwords for Ubuntu Forums, so I care not at all if somebody gets my Ubuntu Forum password or hacks it. Knock yourself out. Post is kernel Linux.
You kind of sneaky, yeah. You sneaky mentioned in there KeePassX. That's not that wasn't a mistake. You actually, so if last time on Noah, you were using a Firefox-based password manager. Now yes. I get back into town and I discover you switched over to KeePassX. What's going on there?
Kind of a little bit. It's kind of a hybrid approach. The problem with the Firefox manager is it doesn't do multiple accounts terribly well. And so if I have a single site where I have 5 or 7 or 10 different accounts, what it tries to do is you type the username in and then it tries to match the password up for a specific URL. Well, depending on how you enter into that login form, if the URL is different enough, then Firefox doesn't recognize it.
Which happens a surprising amount of time, especially with forums and stuff like that. Now, LastPass used to kind of suck at this, and one of the things that I did to get around it was I would just fix the URL when I'm saving the password.
So what I did with LastPass was I would open LastPass up and click on the account I was looking for and use that as my navigation as well as my password. Yeah. That doesn't work terribly well in Firefox. The other thing I don't like about Firefox, and this is a small thing, but once you have decrypted your key vault with your master password list, anyone that logs into Firefox can just click on options and click view password, and it just shows all of your passwords in plain text. So there's a couple things I didn't like, and so for that reason, I like KeePassX, and basically I'm using OwnCloud to sync the password file back and forth, and that seems to be working fine on my desktop. And as long as it's just for one-off accounts, it's not a big deal. I'm still using Firefox for any of the stuff that I use on like a daily basis. Stuff,
two different. Firefox. Well, I guess in some ways maybe you're more secure by using 2 different password managers, but boy, that sounds like a pain in the butt.
It's not a security thing as much as it's, well, I know if it's something I use on a daily basis, it's in Firefox, and if it's not, if it doesn't automatically populate, I got to go to KeePass to look at it.
So what happens if you accidentally leave KeePass running on 2 computers?
Nothing. Nothing.
And they don't like auto-save the database or anything like that where they'd overwrite each other. Okay.
No, in fact, it turns yellow at the top and says this KeePass database has been modified. Do you want to save? And you can, you click yes. But I never leave it running, right? Because if you leave it running, you're logged in, then it's the same problem as Firefox. The thing I like about KeePass is I can open it up, get the password I need, then close it back up and leave my browser still open and signed in and everything's working, but all those passwords aren't exposed to anyone that comes by the machine.
So I was pretty impressed with the amount of hype that Ubuntu Forum hacks got. I mean, people were just really falling all over themselves to report on it. It was really something. It didn't seem to be, from my takeaway, that surprising. vBulletin with an old add-on, pretty low-hanging fruit, and it sounded pretty isolated. But that's just my quick take on it. There's another story that I was really surprised got a lot of attention. And that, I don't know about you, was the new version of Skype for Linux and Chromebooks. A lot of reporting on this one, and it's apparently going to be coming out in stages of progress. They have rebuilt Skype, back-end WebRTC, front-end Electron-based, and they claim It's going to be a first-class citizen eventually. Right now, only audio support, no video calls are available. Can't call old Skype clients. Old Skype clients can't call it. So it's kind of off on a land of its own in that regard, which might leave some Linux users in a lurch that are trying to communicate with each other. I thought about honestly installing it and calling you up and seeing if you sounded any different with it, which maybe we'll try at some point.
Sure.
But I'm not getting all the love. Until this is a complete product, it doesn't seem to be that exciting to me. WebRTC based and you're not doing video, all right, wake me up when you manage to get video working. Otherwise, it seems to be a non-competitive product that can't even match the feature set of the old version. Not to mention, none the least, it's now a web application instead of a desktop native application.
Right. I can live with Electron, no problem. That's really not a big issue to me.
What? Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say more.
No, I didn't know. No,
I agree.
I can live with Electron instead, rather than a native application. What I don't like is the fact that it seems like they're going the Electron route to avoid having to commit any skin in the game to an actual native Linux app. And
I don't know. Visual Studio Code actually seems to be a legitimate product that they're continuing to work on, and that's an Electron app too. So they've shown that they have some success shipping Electron apps. And one other thing, I'm not thrilled that it is. Whenever it's something that's involving working with my local video and audio devices, I prefer as native to the metal as possible. However, you gotta admit, Skype, even with a native desktop application, is totally dependent on the internet and the web, quote unquote. So it's essentially, for all intents and purposes, a web app. It requires their proprietary closed network to be online. It requires that you authenticate to their proprietary network with their own username and password system. So for all intents and purposes, it is a web application already. And if that means now actually just admitting that and shipping an Electron version means they can actually ship something, that'll be impressive. What I don't understand, and what I think is likely the case, is what's their real motivation? I think likely the case, the real motivation is Chromebooks, because Chromebooks are legitimately a phenomenon in the education space, in a lot of different areas, and they want Skype to be available in those places. So I think they're playing the PR game, claiming once again that Microsoft loves Linux, when in reality their motivation is shipping a Chromebook app, and Linux getting support for that, that's on top of it. And because it's using kind of Google's technologies and it's using Electron, they probably only have a small handful of people at Microsoft actually working on it that actually know what they're doing, and it has to go through the rest of the process through a company and a culture that doesn't understand this stuff. So I'm never going to be that impressed by it, I suspect.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not. And in fact, we got some criticism, again, not to constantly be referencing the feedback segment. We got some feedback coming in that kind of criticizes us for taking that stance. But the reality is, that until they actually have some skin in the game, I'm not too excited. All that said, I'll be perfectly happy and totally content, and I'll give Microsoft the thumbs up if we can get 16:9 video with the traditional high quality Skype audio, and it's a native Linux app. I don't care if it's Electron. I don't care if it's web-based. I don't care what it is, as long as it works.
I would use it in the way that I use Hangouts, which is I'm going to use it until a more competitive open source solution comes along. And part of that solution has to also provide a network of people that are willing to use it and a standard way to communicate with them and a standard vernacular to communicate how to connect. And when there's an open source something that meets all of those checkboxes, which I would happily switch to. It doesn't have to be Skype or Hangouts. And when Microsoft ships something, if it meets those things you just said, I'd give it a look. Yeah. All right. Next story is a little bit of a bummer. I feel bad for the GNOME Maps folks because I just, go figure, I just started using the heck out of GNOME Maps on the road trip. I didn't use it exclusively, but I had the Apollo there with Fedora 24. And, again, a native application. It's nice to have something running right there on my machine. And it seems like GNOME Maps hit a bit of a dead end in their deal with MapQuest. If you look at the screenshot here, it's just tiles of MapQuest developer agreement information. It's kind of a bummer. The application's tile provider, and I actually made the mistake of thinking, I assumed it was OpenStreetMaps, but no, it was MapQuest. And the tile provider has amended its usage policy and discontinued direct tile access. Now, GNOME developers could pay for it to keep using the service or find a new one. And they also are looking into OpenMap. They said, I'll need some help with contacting OpenStreetMap And with finding a solution to our tile issue, I think we're going to need our own tiles.gnome.org for a map application platform to be feasible. That's the chief developer of Maps. Now, OpenStreetMaps does offer its own tile servers, but it's not clear whether their use in GNOME Maps would go against the terms of service. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Boy, that is a real bummer, though. And because of the breakage, Ubuntu GNOME has already announced that they'll be dropping Maps from the desktop for the next release.
You know, I got to be honest with you, man. Why is it that we are so concerned about having maps on a computer?
If it's not using an open source data set, I kind of agree, because then it's like kind of what's the point if it's just a Linux desktop app to a proprietary backend, not as compelling. That said, I did start using GNOME Maps primarily because it's very fast. And it's nice to have something where I could have my web browser, I snap my web browser to one side of the screen, and I snap GNOME Maps to the other side of the screen, and I can search for points of interest in one workspace and map them in another, and not have to be switching tabs or searching in Google Maps or whatever. So for me, I started using it out of sort of separating off my work. You know, like I do my searching for location here, and I do my Googling for information over here about parking and whatnot. And I appreciated the speed too when sometimes web apps over a MiFi connection seem a little laggy, and so this felt fairly responsive as the tiles loaded. I also dug the idea that I, at the time, mistakenly made the assumption it was using OpenStreetMaps and thought it was cool that I was using an open source desktop running an open source application to access an open mapping system. However, that is not the case. Maybe it will be in the future after this mistake. But I definitely learned a hard lesson about not hosting your own infrastructure, because it's super embarrassing when you launch that Maps application and it just tiles of MapQuest developer agreement all over. As of July 11th, 2016, direct tile access has been discontinued. Nice, guys. Real classy. How about a watermark or something and then provide the tiles? They want that money probably for the bandwidth. Anyways, you might be right. Maybe it'll be, if they can't find another solution, maybe it'll be the end of GNOME Maps and you'll have your way. You'll be happy.
Well, yeah, I don't really care one way or the other. I just don't see the appeal. I mean, the amount of times I've really needed to, whatever. It is what it is, but it's not for me.
Okay. You know what isn't for me anymore? Fedora 24. I had to wipe it off. I had to get rid of it. Yeah, we're going to talk about this now. So here's a little problem Chris has. I'm going to pull up a photo here that I took of my laptop. I sent this to Noah, so you've seen this photo. And I thought at first my drive had failed, because I got an error message on my Apollo when I lifted the lid from sleep. For a brief moment, I saw my GNOME desktop, and then it dropped to a text console with an error message of reboot and select proper boot device, or insert a boot media in the selected boot device and press any key. I power off the laptop, I power it back on, just goes to that error message after a little cursor flashing. Oh, very sad, very sad. I don't quite know what caused this particular problem, but I'll tell you where it started. It started on my road trip, where I brought my Fedora 24 install as sort of my daily driver. And as any reasonable person does, I stayed up to date with all of the updates over the MiFi connection, because that's worth spending the data on. And when I received the kernel 4.6 update, my system would no longer boot. I could work around that by choosing kernel 4.5 in the grub menu, and then it would continue to boot. And essentially, because I didn't have any NVIDIA drivers or anything like that, there was no real major repercussions of running something older than the latest installed kernel. And this workaround worked for a while, and I thought there would be a quick fix. I thought we'd have a patch. And a couple of days went by. Eventually, I got back to work. It still hadn't been fixed. I got on Linux Unplugged, and I mentioned, hey guys, I'm having this weird problem with my Apollo, where now Fedora 24 doesn't boot whenever I choose the 4.6 kernel. This is before, by the way, I got that won't boot error message. Mm-hmm. And pretty quickly, I started hearing from the audience with different types of machines, with one common thread being all Skylake systems. Mm-hmm. Were having this issue after the latest Fedora kernel update to kernel 4.6. And so a few days after that passed, and I found this blog post by Adam W., and he talks about the current issue with Skylake systems on Fedora after the kernel 4.6 update. So this is something the project is now aware of and working on. The problem appears when you install the latest kernel update and a new kernel fails to boot very early in the process. The story behind this bug is that it's not actually a kernel bug at all. but it is a bug in the microcode_control package. This package is which contains both processor microcode updates and loaders for such updates for Intel processors. And it goes on in the post, which you guys can find in the show notes, about working around this and sort of more information about the microcode issue. So that was really my main issue, and I thought, well, I could just continue to boot off the 4.5 kernel until they probably eventually come up with a fix. So I did that until I woke from sleep about a day later, and I got that failed to boot, and I could never load Fedora after that again. And I hadn't really done any recent updates as far as I know. So I'm not really sure what happened. I put it to sleep. About 30 minutes later, I woke it up, still had plenty of battery life. In fact, it had so much battery life that I was able to reinstall the next OS while on battery with no issues. So and the new OS, I believe, is running kernel 4.6.4 or 4.6.3. I'm not sure. Let's see. 4.6.4, and it's not having this boot issue.
And what distro is that?
Arch.
Oh, okay.
Well, and also Mint, but Mint isn't on 4.6. So what happened is sort of like exactly I said was going to happen. And that's sort of why I'm upset about this particular problem. What was it, on May 22nd? I have it linked in the show notes. It was episode 418 of the Linux Action Show when Fedora announced it was going to be a couple of weeks late. And that same week, Linus released kernel 4.6. And 4.6, for those of you who don't remember from a few weeks ago, was notable because Linus himself came out and said, this is a particularly good one. It's nice and stable. It's a great kernel. This is one that I'm going to call out as one of our better kernels. And I said at the time, boy, Fedora, being sort of a cutting edge, shipping the best open source distro. Remember, this is the distro that shipped a Pulse Audio volume control applet before it even worked. It just slid and didn't actually do anything, but it was important to ship early code. They were pausing their project at a perfect time to say, well, maybe we should look at kernel 4.6. There's precedent, by the way, to have them do this. So it's not like this is totally unheard of. And at the time I argued, see, the great thing about them pausing and just shipping with that great kernel is that when Fedora users installed Fedora 24, they wouldn't have to worry 1 or 2 weeks later about a kernel update coming along and hosing their system. Exactly what I said. That's exactly what's happened. I don't understand why they have this hard set mentality about these super fixed rules when software itself is not fixed and static like that. And they could have tested the kernel. They could have ran into this problem on their own before they shipped it to thousands of users who now have non-booting laptops or desktops. And this could have been avoided if they just would have shipped with something a little bit newer and they just would have waited another week or two. And I don't understand why that's so hard. Why for you don't see that as an obvious thing? Like
not at all, because it seems like that's a never-ending battle. So you delay a couple of weeks or whatever it is, and you start working on 4.6. Then 4.7 is right around the corner. I mean, when do you draw that line? I mean,
well, first of all, the next stable kernel wouldn't be just around the corner, and second of all, this is a particular special kernel that the creator of the kernel himself called out as one of the great ones. Now, if you're spotlighting great open source technology for DevOps and SysOps to deploy in the Fedora workstation or in the Fedora cloud, and by the way, this included important cloud server technologies, that make the distribution more competitive on a VPS and on servers. So, I mean, there was compelling reason to ship it.
What did the Fedora user say when we first decided we were going to review Fedora 24? Did I not say numerous times? I think even in the review episode, for me personally, I'm not going to install it for a couple of weeks, maybe even a month afterwards, because having used Fedora since version 1, all 23 of them after that, there's always some little issue that comes out in the first couple of weeks, and then they get it solved in about a month and a half in. It's totally solid. And if you wait that little bit and let them sort that out.
Okay, hold that thought. And let me finish the last thought. Here would be my bar, Noah, just for how do you decide when to actually pause and freeze for a little while longer and work it in and test it? I would say the line's pretty easy. If you are planning to ship a core OS component like your kernel, that affects so many things about the system. If you're planning to ship that within 1 to 2 weeks after release, I would say it's worth not releasing until you're ready to just do it as the core. That's the line. Because what you're asking is your new user base 1 or 2 weeks after their install to potentially nuke their entire system, which actually did happen in my case. Now, to your next point about how all long-term Fedora users know that they should wait a couple of weeks or maybe even wait till Aurora ships before they should actually run Fedora. I acknowledge that is... Huh?
I don't think I went quite that far, but...
I would add that, though. I mean, like, really? Oh, okay. Well, where do you draw the line, Noah? What arbitrary date do you decide? How do you know when you should make the cut?
About a month. It is an arbitrary line, but about a month. I usually wait about a month.
What you're saying, fundamentally, is it is acceptable for a distribution to put you through enough shit over the years that you got whipped so hard that you learned to back off and wait, and you had to suss out how long you should wait based on how many times you got burned by things that have failed. And for you, that's an acceptable way for one of the most watched distributions to ship and deliver software.
What I'm saying is that over the years, what I have found is that distributions that ship things that are very, very new and very, very bleeding edge, oftentimes, in my experience, run into some issues. And so what I like to do is wait a little bit until those issues get worked out, and then I'm okay to jump on board. Now, if I was the kind of person that had enough time to fill out bug reports and stuff like that, it would probably be a valuable contribution for me to use that stuff and say, oh, Skype doesn't install and GNS3 didn't install. It's just a couple of things that happened.
I think that is that is just a sensible thing to say. But I think it also is acknowledging that they are doing amateur work and that their final product isn't good enough. And I think folks like OpenSUSE and Arch would argue with you, and now Solus and others would argue with you that you can ship modern current software and not blow up the distro on a repeated cycle. I mean, if you listen to Linux Unplugged, you'll hear Richard Brown talk about how SUSE does the testing so that way they can deliver continuous software updates, and they're not out there blowing up people's install every single week.
You can't possibly tell me that there's no distro out there that can test all the different various pieces of software with all the new various pieces of software. So essentially what you have is you have two choices. Either we just kind of have a hodgepodge, which is the rolling distro, which is everyone throws it out. We deal with issues as they come up, or we make an artificial line in the sand and say, this is the stopping point. No. Everyone get to this point, and then we're going to release we'll put whatever software versions, the chips fall where they lie, and then we'll deal with all those softwares. And then for the next 5 months at least, I don't have to worry about that changing.
I think that's a bit of a straw man because here's why. It's not an all or nothing proposition. So you can have automated testing that works significantly well. I mean, if you look at the LTS 1604 releases before the final version, those particular releases were actually of great quality. The shipped version was less quality.
I agree. And we gave about the night before. Yeah.
And we evaluated, when they shipped it, that we discussed what they shipped and how it works. Yep. And the thing about that is you can't hold one distro to one bar and another distro to a totally different bar because they just can't quite do it. That's not reasonable. And here's why. Well, let me finish. Hold on. Here's why I think you kind of had a straw man there, because I'm not asking for them to come up with some great solution. It's the choices were actually really straightforward. Is there a brand new version of the kernel that we're going to ship within a couple of weeks? If the answer is yes, this is a binary decision. If answer yes, then we should just delay by 1 more week and test. And they could test it potentially, hopefully, as responsible distribution maintainers, they would test it on semi-modern hardware and older hardware, and they would discover this particular flaw. I'm not asking for them to be some great arbitrators of what's solid, what's safe, and what's not. I'm simply looking at what's best for our user base, what major change do we see coming down the pipe, and how could we make that better for our end users? That's the only question I'm asking for them to say, to raise. And here's the fundamental issue, Noah. Some dumb podcaster in Arlington, Washington, thought of that back on May 22nd and said, hey, what about this? And if I, some stupid guy sitting here in front of a green screen, could think of something so stupid and basic as that, why aren't they thinking of it? It's amateur work.
I think you're just approaching things differently, and I disagree with your fundamental premise that you can't hold different distributions to different bars. I think you absolutely can, and I think you absolutely should. I think that fundamentally, Fedora ships a different product than Canonical ships with Ubuntu, and I think that because of that, you hold them to 2 different bars. I was furious, and
So you're saying that Fedora ships a lower quality product and Canonical ships a higher quality product, and so they shouldn't be judged by the same metrics?
No, different products, not higher or lower quality. Different.
They're different categories of the market, essentially.
Well,
yeah.
So Fedora is shipping towards I want
power
to
user.
Try all the newest stuff before we know if it works or not.
Hence why they should include kernel 4.6, right? Go ahead.
I think, well, to a point, right? But until you get to rolling, again, you have to draw that line somewhere. Now, in hindsight, yes, I agree. If you we look back, we say they have a bunch of problems with 4.6, and it happens to be on the most commonly sold processor to date. If you go out and Best Buy and buy any computer, it's going to probably have Skylake in it, right? Or any of the System 76, or any Lenovo, which I happen to know is who Red Hat is buying those laptops from right now. So that means that all of their laptops that were bought in 2016 came with Skylake processors. Yes, I agree. If you have a problem with 4.6, probably should have figured that out.
All right.
I admit that.
Okay.
But I think that fundamentally, I don't think there's a problem if you're not going to have a rolling release to draw an arbitrary line and say, this is the time that we're going to stop and see what works and see what doesn't work, and we'll hash those out. And I think the appropriate way to use that software in production is to wait a month and let all the people that are okay with their system bog it up a little bit, sort that out, and then we get all the problems solved, and then we install.
That just makes, first of all, that makes the life cycle of Fedora kind of not that great. And
I agree.
And my last point there is, what's the point? What's the point if they're going to be a release-based distro that tests this stuff and does betas, does release candidates and ships code, and still manages at the end of the day to screw the pooch? What's the point? And I guess I'll just and here's why I'm upset, and we can move on because we're spending way too much time on this because we're here to talk about Mint today. But I'm bummed because I've always done this for as long as I've used Linux. Maybe it's because there's multiple choice. I always fantasize about my plan B distro. Which one am I going to hop to if my current distro goes to hell? And I've always thought it'd be super nice, especially with universal package installers, if maybe one day I would just end up on a Fedora install that I use DNF to upgrade between releases, maybe a month after a release. I don't know. And I felt really happy there. And the problem is, in my estimation, this disqualifies them as a Plan B backup for me. I tried to make Fedora 24 work on that Apollo, and it just, I don't even know why maybe it's a Skylake issue. I have, in the show notes, I have 5 different references to Skylake issues under Linux. Skylake seems to be a major problem for Linux, and I won't even get into the P-state issues that Skylake has on laptops. So maybe it's not all blame on Fedora here, but I've been burned now because no other distro I've had these kind of problems with, and I just feel like it's not for me, which is too bad because I really wanted it to be my next distro. I don't know.
I'm okay with that as long as you acknowledge that. It's like when you were telling Michael Dominic that there's a different way. I'm just telling you, a month into Fedora, there is a different experience to be had.
Yeah, it's called Aurora, and I think that's a fine distribution. Okay. I mean, really, what am I waiting for? Am I waiting for the product to get what it should have been when it shipped?
For the problems that weren't discovered in testing.
And how do I arbitrarily know when that moment is? How do I know that this time it's going to be a month in?
Well, you start doing Google searches for the software you run, and nobody seems to have problems with that.
Nobody talks about Fedora online, though, so that doesn't get you anything. Not even their subreddit's a snooze fest. You can hardly find anybody.
I've never posted or browsed their
It took like 5. It took like 5 or 6 days for the Skylake issue for anybody to really be talking about it. And if this was an Ubuntu release that killed Skylake-based machines, people, I mean, with all those issues we heard about the Skylake video flashing on 1604, that was a major discussion within the day of the release.
Right, and I hold Ubuntu to a different standard because I think that when you have an LTS that releases on day one, I think it should work perfectly on day one, 0 equivocations. And I think if you can't do that, it defeats the entire purpose of having an LTS.
I think you and I would be on the same page if they took Fedora Workstation out of the title and they called it Fedora Beta. Then I would agree with you.
Yes, you know what? That I agree with. And not only do I agree with that, I definitely think there's a huge market. And please, Red Hat, if anyone from Red Hat sees this, please come up with a product that is designed for business and specifically geared toward an answer to Canonical's LTS. Because if they did that, especially if it had a release cycle longer than 6 months, I swear to God, I would switch everyone I come in contact with over to whatever that product is.
And you don't want it to be CentOS, I guess.
No, because that's a
way
little too far.
Yeah. You're not going to use CentOS to set up your Plex server. Well, you might, but
Plex server fine. But installing VLC, media player is a joke. And the problem is when you go to get support or ask people about it, they go, why would you be installing VLC on a server distro? I don't want to deal with that. I want a desktop distro that has a long support cycle that is backed by a large company. If I had something like that from Red Hat, I'd switch like that. And everyone that I know I would switch to like that.
And I think by Red Hat too is a particular important part because that would give it a lot of market legitimacy in your particular field too. So
yeah, I agree that the Fedora workstation implies that you could use it on a workstation, and I would not mind
and
Fedora on a workstation.
Oh yeah, I like if Michael Dominic, when he ran, anyways, we go.
That's a great point.
So maybe this will be a solution for you, Noah. This might just be what you want. It's backed by a large company. It has long-term support, and now you can run even more applications on Chrome OS. Yeah, crossover for Android is now running on Chromebooks, which means via the magic of Wine and the hard work over the crossover Office team, you can run Windows applications on Chromebooks. Legitimately, they show examples of it here in a video that's embedded over at the Phoronix article. This is not ready to ship just yet, but they are able to install Steam for Windows on the Chromebook, and you could also install all kinds of other things. Now, that's kind of neat. It's kind of a neat accomplishment. And if I ended up with a Chromebook, I would love to play around with this. It's not going to make me buy a Chromebook, but if I had an extra Chromebook sitting around anymore, I'd give it a shot. The crossover guys are pretty clever. Literally the room next to me, in the living room next to me, I have my Apollo in there, and crossover is running right now because I was patching Star Trek Online this morning, and the thing I love about crossover over Play on Linux or just pure Wine is they have a massive database now of applications that are built into the crossover Office installer. You just say, I want to install a Windows application. It dwarfs what's in Play on Linux because what's listed in there is, like, if it's well rated, it works. Like, so what's in that list is really good stuff. And so for me, it actually makes installing Windows applications easier than it is on a Windows because it'll go out and get the setup.exe off of their weird server where
it's a Windows repo.
Yeah, it goes and pulls. Yeah, it's really nice. And the bottle support's super great. I can clone bottles really easily and experiment with stuff. So I love crossover Office. Plus, they contribute upstream to Wine. So I usually end up buying their product about once a year and knowing that some of that money is going towards Wine development. So if this sells a few more copies of crossover for Android and helps more Wine development, I'm all for that. So that's pretty cool.
Man, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel if we're talking about cares Noah can give to how we can virtualize Android.
I could see it though. I could see it useful to some people, and I know there's a few folks on the audience. They got Chromebooks. Noah, they got the Chromebooks.
Yeah, they should install a real OS on it.
They do, but you know what? They got the Chromebooks too. That happens. They're cheap and whatnot. All right, Noah, let's stop talking about Chromebooks. That's all the news for this week. Let's go review Linux Mint 18. I have been uniquely interested in reviewing Linux Mint 18 for several reasons, none of which really are important. What? I get nothing out of you.
Well, I don't. What am I supposed to say?
I was trying to get a rise out of you. All right, fine.
That didn't seem like a very good intro, but I wasn't about to interrupt you a second time.
I was just trying to get a rise out of you. See, Okay, now quit screwing around. Now let's get started. It's come time to review Linux Mint 18, and to be honest, I am actually looking forward to reviewing this particular release, not only because some of the new X apps, the new theme, the new rebase on Ubuntu 16.04, but also in light of their security issues in the past. I think it's a good lens to look at this particular desktop, especially as it looks like 16.04 could potentially use a little help to shape it up to a great desktop, and Mint's definitely known for that with a lot of popularity. Before we dive into the review, I want to dive into Linux Academy. Oh, Linux Academy, sponsor right here on the Linux Action Show, and a great platform for you to learn more about all of the tools and technology around Linux and open source. In fact, if you go to linuxacademy.com/unplugged, you'll get our Unplugged discount. It's so good. I went over to those jerks on the Unplugged show. I punched them in their face. I took their promo code and I brought it over to this show. linuxacademy.com/unplugged. Go get the discount and try Linux Academy. Learn more about any particular application stack you want, or deep dive into individual topics with learning plans available, quizzes, hands-on guides, instructor and mentoring help, and a fantastic community. You go to linuxacademy.com/unplugged. You'll also get to check out their brand new fancy website, the new stacks that you get to fork and make great learning cards from, and all of the other great features of the Linux Academy platform. They're growing like crazy, adding new staff all the time, reinvesting in existing content, and creating brand new stuff at linuxacademy.com/unplugged. Thanks, Linux Academy. Okay, Noah. I want to start with my initial impressions of Linux Mint 18. And I will come right out and say I wasn't expecting a lot, but I did have a particular use case in mind, and I started pretty disappointed with my results. So I decided to load it just for a little variety on the Dell XPS 13 of mine. And one of the nice attributes of this laptop is it has that infinity edgeless display that's high DPI. And it really does look great. And one of the reasons that the Mint project wanted to fork its own editor and create the all those different X apps was to ensure high DPI support. And it's one of the things they've worked on in the theme. So I wanted to use a high DPI display so I could try that out. Of course, when I first launched Linux Mint and installed it, it didn't detect that I was on a high DPI screen, and the font was almost unreadable. In fact, if I zoom in here, you can kind of begin to read it, but you can actually begin to see the screen. That's how small the font was. That was my initial impression.
1 letter per pixel.
And this is not a huge issue, as I very quickly figured out. I went into the settings, kind of buried a little. It took me a little bit to find them, and I'll be honest, I had to Google a little bit. But once I found the high DPI setting, turned that on, and was really, really, really impressed with how nice the Cinnamon desktop and the various applications looked high DPI on my XPS screen. I think it's the best looking desktop. A couple of weird things like the controls, like the close, maximize, and minimize, super tiny still, so really hard to find and click. But the window controls, the fonts, the menu, everything is just gorgeous looking. Really a nice setup. And I complemented that too by going with a dark theme. So I'll talk more about that in a moment. But my initial impressions went from, come on, you guys couldn't auto-detect this, and even hints of worried that maybe it wasn't going to work. Because again, when you're going for Mint, right, you're going for a pretty great out-of-the-box experience. So I kind of thought...
Beginner experience, yeah.
I kind of thought high DPI, if it was... It seems like the math would be, crazy high resolution detected, turn high DPI on. Pretty simple. But it didn't happen that way. But once I found the setting, turned it on, really, really looked good. So my initial impressions went from to, holy smokes, this thing just booted crazy fast, and it looks great. And that's where I started. I'll talk more about it, but I want to give you a chance to share your kind of initial impressions on Mint and any hardware stuff you want to share.
Yeah, so, as I said before, in the pre-show, I was talking about I'm not the best person to review distros because I have a very, very limited subset of things that I have to have, and if I have those things, I'm perfectly content. I use VLC to watch my movies. I have Thunderbird to check my email. I browse the web in Firefox, and I need a terminal and Telegram. And if I have those things, and all of those things work right out of the box with me with Linux Mint, basically as good as every other distro. And I did think, and I continue to think, that one of the biggest advantages that Cinnamon has, and why I think Linux Mint has become so popular, is because it really models after that traditional Windows-like user experience, right? I have that button at the bottom. I click on it. It brings up my applications menu. It's not necessarily a Windows 7 clone, but it so closely models it that anyone that's comfortable in something like Windows 7 or Windows XP is going to have no problem using Linux Mint, and that's not necessarily the case that I see even with things like Ubuntu, where Unity is actually a pretty I think that bar makes it pretty straightforward to launch applications and maximizing and minimizing, but things like the globally integrated menus and stuff make that a little difficult. Linux Mint doesn't have any of that stuff, so I still think it's a great distro if you're just starting out in Linux and you're looking to make that initial jump from Windows over to Linux Mint.
Yeah, I would definitely add a second to that. So the UI itself is pretty familiar. Why don't we start with a couple of things? Since we're talking about the interface here, I have it loaded so I could show it to you on air. I have it loaded right here in a VM. It's a pretty powerful VM, but just full disclosure, this is a VM. My actual production rig was on an XPS 13. So I'll show you one thing that I really liked, Noah, and that would be the new theming. I'll come back to the Update Manager here in just a moment, which I think needs its own separate discussion. So if you go look now in the settings system, which is divided into appearance and preferences, hardware, and administration. They have a lot of really nice settings you can change, a lot of cool things like tweaking effects and whatnot. But let's go to themes. And in here, it currently ships by default with the Mint X theme. You click this, expand it out, and you can choose the new Mint Y theme. This is based on Arc, which is one of my favorites. But they have forked it a bit and tweaked a few things. And they also have Mint Y Dark. So I'll choose Mint Y Dark here. And for the icons, I'll choose Mint Y. You could choose it. They have a couple of different options, but I'll choose Mint Y. And for the controls, I'll also choose Mint Y Dark. And now you'll begin to notice my whole color scheme has dramatically shifted. In fact, just to sort of help differentiate it, I can go change the desktop background here and put something that makes it stand out a little more. So there we go. Now you can see the contrast of the theme, which I think it's a very compelling looking theme. I think it looks very nice. It is. Right now, I mean, it's available for other distros if you work at it, but right now it's something that sets the Mint desktop apart. It's sort of a direction they're going in, but how they implemented it is really sort of a perfect echo of some of the things I'm starting to really like about Mint, and some of the things that are drawing me to it in a way that I was totally unprepared for. And I'll talk about that here in just a second, but before we go all into that, while I still have it up here, let's talk about the update mechanism, because the way Mint handles updates, the way they sort of encourage the user to not install kernel updates has gotten some criticism on the internet. And so when you first launch the update manager, like I have just here in this VM, they have 3 different options that are presented with the user. The middle one is checked by default. The first option reads, "Don't break my computer!" And this is recommended for novice users, it says. Only select updates which are known to be safe or which do not impact critical parts of the operating system. Do not show me updates which can harm the stability of my system. Now, the second option, which is chosen by default, optimize stability and security. This is recommended for most users. It says an asterisk. Only select updates which are known to be safe or which do not impact critical parts of the operating system, which I would interpret that to be kernel. But also show me security and kernel updates. So they're not selected by default, but they're shown by default. And then the last is always update everything, recommended for experienced users, again in asterisks or also known as italics. Select all available updates. Keep my computer fully up to date. If a regression breaks something, I'll fix it. That mentality right there, if a regression breaks something, I'll fix it, shows you the order of priority. It's not about security. It's not about safety of the core security of the system. It's not about solving exploits. It's about protecting from regressions. So they have a bottom-up thinking to security with this particular rationale. So I'm going to choose the middle one. That's the default, and usually default reigns supreme, so I say OK. The other thing it'll do here in a moment, there it goes, is it now says, hey, before I check for updates, would you like to select a faster mirror? Again, something Mint has done for a while. But as somebody who uses a lot of distros, it's super cool when I come back to this and see this and I go, geez, that is nice that it's doing that for me. Every time I see that, I love that. So I open up the Mint selector and it automatically starts doing speed tests out to the different mirrors. And just for expediency, I'll choose kernel.org because it's coming in at 1.4 megabits. And now when I update the cache, it's pulling from that source. All this kind of stuff, really easy, really nice. And then you can see as it pulls down the updates, it'll start categorizing out the different updates in terms of their severity. I have issue with this. I feel like this is solving 2007's problem. There are ways to reliably deliver software now. It's just simply not good enough in 2016 to say the way of delivering software is too risky, so we're just going to try to put our heads in the sand and not deliver certain updates. That's like Noah's rationale for waiting a month to use Fedora.
And I think it's perfectly appropriate here.
I think it is accepting a technical limitation that does not have to exist. These technical limitations only exist because we created them, and we have begun solving them with atomic updates, transactional updates, sandboxing, all of these particular technologies that smartphones have been using now for years to update software. They are available to the Linux desktop. There are ways to solve this, and whose responsibility, if nobody else's, is the special curator who's creating a better Linux experience sounds like the perfect group of people to say, we don't accept this answer. We are going to do better than this. We are going to find a way to have our users secure and our system reliable. It technically can be done. Why don't they do it?
So I think there's a couple of things. First of all, I think that you're right. Their fundamental focus is on stability and usability, not necessarily security. That said, I don't necessarily think that Mate offers any real significant usability advantages over anything else. But be that as it may, the second thing is that I think that it is appropriate to, if we're going to say that things like transactional updates and all these things,
whatever it is,
if we're going to say that that's the answer, then there needs to be a fundamental way that a user can do that without having to understand Linux or the system, right? So essentially, there has to be some sort of fallback mode. So when something breaks, it boots into the fallback mode and says, your system appears to be broken. Click this button to go back to whatever it was. And that whole process has to be automated.
Well, that's the whole point of Ubuntu Snaps. Ubuntu Snap updates or Fedora Atomic updates is you have a good known state that is atomically snapshotted, and if the new update doesn't work, you just reboot into the last known good state. That seems to be like
and as long as there's an easy user way to do that, that's fine. It doesn't seem like those tools are available.
It could be fully automated. The system could detect a fail to boot, restart, and simply select the last known good state. It's totally possible. FreeBSD, in large part thanks to Alan Jude, is now implementing ZFS boot environments to essentially accomplish this very thing. This is being solved by other platforms already. I mean, it's not even frickin' theoretical, dude. It has been shipping in production for years.
Yeah. Well, Snaps haven't. I mean, so whatever it is that is here, I think that it's appropriate to give them a little time to implement this stuff. I don't know that that if it's not today, if it isn't invented today, then they.
I think in the meantime, having sort of heavy-handedly recommended your users don't apply their kernel updates is not the right answer right now. So I'm not a security auditor anymore. I don't do penetration testing for a living. I haven't been a sysadmin for a few years, so I'm not like the guy that should be looking at this stuff. But when I look at the system, I see a super well put together system that acknowledges that the computer environments are changing in ways that are not necessarily pro-user. Some of the things that are really nice about using the Mint desktop is the file manager has features that I've completely forgotten about that are just nice to have. My terminal has a slight transparency. I forgot how much I missed that when GNOME took that away. They turned coloring on by default. The menu is fast. It searches really everything you could want, including installed items and possibly installable items. The whole experience is really nice. And I totally see the role this fits. So this XPS, if I wanted a machine that I turned on, every couple of weeks and did some work on and didn't want to have to worry about 1,000 updates and what might break and what might change on me, this is the perfect desktop for me in that scenario. So that's really where I connect with Mint, the uncanny valley that I can't overcome is what appears to be a fundamental flaw in my estimation of the distribution. I'm about to demonstrate what I think is a pattern of choosing the easy route over security. And it seems to be pervasive throughout the distribution. Convenience over security appears to be a choice made over and over again.
Yep.
And what I come down to is, I think one of the core issues that doesn't sit with me with Mint is that it's one man's vision of a desktop environment. And the Linux desktop, at its very core, is a massively diverse a set of opinions and what we all collectively think makes a great desktop environment. And sometimes that's chaos, but eventually, in a whole, it produces something really great. And it's the diversity of those opinions that helps us accomplish things and think of things that the one man's vision can never foresee. And sometimes that leaves a lot of room for things like major security improvements. I don't really fully understand the technical ramifications of this, but one of the things I've noticed about Linux Mint is when I launch Firefox, it for a while now has had this obnoxious Linux Mint search homepage right here. and it has that preset up. There's things pre-configured in Firefox, and I did not understand exactly how they accomplished this. So I did a little sniffing around, thinking about how I would have accomplished this back in the 90s or in the early 2000s when I was implementing solutions for school districts. And I did it now in retrospect in a very insecure way because I was trying to quickly solve a problem and I wasn't really concerned about the ramifications of a massive user base because it's one computer lab, two computer labs. And what I did back then is I went in and I created some entries in the Etsy scale directory. And if you look in the Etsy scale directory, it's completely empty right now. However, if you do ls like -la and see all files, you'll notice there is a .mozilla folder in here. And if you go into this .mozilla folder, there's already a Firefox profile created in here that gets copied out to all new user accounts when they get created on the Mint system. And this is on the master ISO image, which means every single Linux Mint user has the same Firefox profile. But what's worse about that is the name is exactly the same. So therefore, the path is exactly the same on every single install of Linux Mint. I could think of several reasons why that's not a great security practice. If somebody targeted Linux Mint again, this would be a particular vulnerability that Linux Mint users are exposed to simply because Clem chose to introduce standardized Firefox installs this way instead of a more appropriate way. And I can't help but interpret this as simply a convenience over security. Are the ramifications in the real world super bad? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's a theoretical problem that will never.
It depends. What if you're using Firefox to manage your passwords?
Oh, well, like you are.
Yeah, exactly. I take the browser, whether for good choice or bad choice on my part, the browser is a central element to my security practice, right? So it is a big deal. At least to me, it would be.
Yeah. You know, another thing I was famously awful at was a real loosey-goosey sudoers file because I didn't want to have to trouble with stuff. And so I took a look at the sudoers file on Linux Mint 18. And a couple of things jumped out at me. There's a couple of things included in here that I wasn't aware of. Like this Mint update one's a pretty good one. Goes out and this file in sudoers.d goes out and calls a completely separate Python script. And that Python script ends up doing all kinds of things in the background as root. If I made a couple of changes to that Python script on any single Mint installation, and I know it's at userlib/Linux Mint/Mint update with a capital U /check apt.py. And if I make a change to that file, it runs as root
without the user knowing.
It's just already in the sudoers file, just added there. Like it's just not. It is again to me. It demonstrates sort of a convenience over a proper security implementation. PolicyKit and other methods of accomplishing this have existed for years now, and I that is the kind of stuff that I feel like I can't really go too far down this rabbit hole because those are just two directories I looked in. And if I keep going down this rabbit hole, if I looked at some of the custom apps that they've created, or who knows how far this goes. This seems to be pervasive in my estimation. And what I'm worried about is there could become a moment in time where a series of poor decisions or just series of decisions made by somebody who doesn't have a lot of time have led a system that leaves a lot of users vulnerable that if somebody wanted to start picking at could very easily be taken advantage of. Yeah. That to me is pretty freaky.
Yeah, especially because Mint has taken over in such popularity, right? Like we can debate the validity of DistroWatch, but the reality is that there is at least a perception, if not a reality, of a large majority of people that are using Linux Mint. And we actually tried at Altispeed for about a year and a half. We tried using Linux Mint as the distro that we were setting people up with and using them on kiosks and stuff. And it wasn't because of the security features. It was for a couple other reasons that we ended up going away from that. But yeah, I do think they have made huge trades in security. Probably most people would argue too far for the sake of convenience and usability. And again, I reiterate.
I think it might be a philosophical thing too.
Well, maybe, but
like Clem might look at these things and go, you know what, guys, in the real world, that's just not a problem. And we're sitting here saying the way security breaches work is by island hopping and taking advantage of a series of vulnerabilities, and then you're in. And it's a house of cards.
There's that, but I have a simpler question. My question is, if you look at something like, and I'm just picking something, just Ubuntu Mate, for example. there is no significant usability advantages over Linux Mint over something like.
I don't know if I completely agree.
Top or the bottom. What is there? I mean, tell me. If there is, I'm not seeing it.
It is the preservation to above all else of the user experience. There is the reason why Cinnamon appeals, I think, to Windows converts is because there is a steady hand of features that you can expect will always remain. And they're not going to jolt you. They don't even change the background very much. They don't jolt you. They don't change. They've created this whole new theme and they don't even ship it by default. It's tucked away and it's gorgeous. And like this stuff is all part of the philosophy that makes Mint work so well. That's why they have fans that are donating considerable money. And that's why guys like SJVN over at ZDNet, he says it's the best Linux desktop period ever in his 25 years. He's never seen a better Linux desktop. And I think if you look at how he's using it, he's got my computer, my documents, an icon to the Chrome web browser on his desktop, and then he's got other desktop icons over there. He's using it exactly like you would use a Windows 2000 or Windows 7 setup, and and that steady hand of being able to continue to rely on that paradigm is, while the Mate desktop on Ubuntu Mate is great, it does move forward in some regards. It does move forward to GTK3. It pushes the envelope in some areas. It does a really, really good job of walking that line, and it's definitely our preferred way of walking the line, and a way that still totally captivates that old paradigm, but just brings in some new stuff. But man, Mint's crazy. They're willing to fork the file manager, the web browser, the terminal, whatever. Not the web browser, but whatever they have to captivate that experience.
And I appreciate that, and I can respect that. I don't think that it's. I guess what I'm saying is those are all very good reasons of why Mint is a great distribution, why it should stick around, and why a lot of people should consider it, particularly if it's a first-time switch. What that doesn't explain in any regard to any level is why these levels, or even close to this level of security vulnerabilities, are necessary or facilitating that experience.
Yeah, I think it's all in, like with that Mint update script in the background. It's to make that really super easy and user transparent, not have to have a dialog bot come up and ask, hey, would you enter your password so I can refresh repos and stuff? I'm sure that's what it's for. The intent is there to make the user experience easier. The problem is, in practice, it makes the user potentially more vulnerable, especially when it's in an area around software updates and downloading software off the web and connecting to the internet. So, surprisingly, though, I know I just feel like I sort of made a case against it. If I put on my average user hat, if I put on my, God, I'm exhausted and I don't want to mess with computers today hat.
Yeah.
There is that aspect of Mint that does appeal. Like if I want a box that I'm not really worried about the security at all, it just doesn't really exist. But if there was a box, I would run Mint on it because I feel like it almost is going to be the most guaranteed problem-free experience. So to follow up on our last review, this machine right here, it dual boots between the heathen Windows 10 and Mint 17. And Mint 17 has been running on that machine since the day Mint 17 released. And it has been my least problem experience for video conferencing under Linux ever. It's been flawless. I haven't had any problems. It works every single week. It has been a great distro. And I've done, I do updates about once every 3 months on it. That's not what I use it for. I just use it to make video calls. And Mint has been a reliably solid update. And if I had a computer where I don't want kernel updates, but I'm still willing to get Chrome updates and, supplement some of that with snap packages or PBAs or whatever, I actually think there is a work case for me with Mint, and I'm going to keep it on the XPS for a while, potentially as long as I've kept 17 on that.
And here's, what would have been interesting and potentially show content when it doesn't work. Upgrade 17 to 18 on that machine and see how that process goes.
Yeah, there are guides, but they heavy-handedly say don't do it. I mean, I have the guide linked in the show notes.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, they say if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and if you don't need to update, don't update. If there's nothing compelling you to update, don't do it. They're like discouraging people to update.
Sounds like my kind of distro.
The only problem is, that scared me away from updating that because they do need that in production. That's why I put Mint on there. So the other nice thing about these is they're supported for a while. So now both these machines are going to have distros that have long support that are designed not to break. So I will give that a shot for a while and see how that works for me. I think on any system where I was connecting to public networks a lot, or if I did personal banking or Bitcoin management, on that machine or dealt with any really private, sensitive information, or was just worried about potentially if there was going to be a target in the Linux desktop space, my desktop might be the one, I wouldn't run Linux Mint. If, however, I wanted something that is it's consumer friendly, easy, it's packaged up and ready to be productized that anybody can use, I think Linux Mint 18 works in that scenario, and I think there are a couple machines in my life where that fits. So I can't necessarily advise Linux Mint 18 to the Linux enthusiast at this time, but for those of you who are willing to go in with your eyes open and acknowledge what it is, I'd say give it a shot. I think the Cinnamon desktop's really polished.
I guess here's my question, and I know it's definitively how I'd answer this question. Would you put your mother on Linux Mint? If your mom came to you and said, "Hey, you know what? I'm looking for a new computer. Would you feel comfortable setting her up on Linux Mint and letting her go hogshead with it?"
I might. Yeah, I might.
Really?
Yeah, I might.
Okay.
I might, because in my experience, long term, one of the things that does tend to mess up these Linux desktops is eventually some update has bitten them. That's what got my dad off Ubuntu desktop, is eventually an update. He couldn't boot after an update. And I just nuked a Fedora 24 install because of a kernel update. It seems like whenever there's something that's going to screw up, it's that. And so I might. The truth be told, I would prefer to do something like Ubuntu Mate 1604. That would be my preference.
See, that's exactly where I'm at. I'm at. Whatever advantages that you have so carefully outlined that Mint offers, I don't think they are enough to keep me on something like Linux Mint. And there are some other esoteric issues too. It's not to pick the whole thing apart or anything, or to get nitty gritty, but so for example, HP JetDirect printers have this issue, which by the way are pretty popular printer. You add a network printer to Linux Mint and it will work for a couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden it will stop working. It turns out there is a bug report open on this, and their answer, or somebody's answer, was, "Yeah, we're aware of it. Someday we'll get around to fixing it." But it has plagued Linux Mint for the last 6 versions. And actually, that was the straw that broke the camel's back when we said we are not installing Linux Mint on anything for Altispeed ever again, because that is to try to explain to your client that it worked one day and it didn't work another day. And not only that, but the people who made the software were aware of it. They just haven't quite gotten around to fixing it.
Yeah, but that feels like that could happen to any particular distro. Maybe.
I guess, but the HP publishes a freaking, Ubuntu script thing to install the HP LAP thing. So
one last thing, just one of the things why I might give Mom Ubuntu Mate today is a big part of that welcome screen that makes it really easy.
Yeah, the software center. Yeah,
and they have that too in Linux Mint. It starts up with the major categories right here, and the featured category is pretty legit. They got VLC, Gparted, GIMP, Wine, FileZilla, Thunderbird, Audacity, Skype, Inkscape, Stellarium, Blender, and a bunch of others, including Shudder and Scribulus and Sublime Text and MPV and VirtualBox and Spotify, Steam and Minecraft and easy Dropbox installation, including file manager integration, all just a click away in the software manager. So they expose that stuff too. So they win there in my estimation. But you're right. I think at this point in time in 2016, for me, one of the things that I would take into consideration for totally new users is how large is the community support, and does it sort of better represent a broader vision of the Linux ecosystem? Because long term, that's probably your better bet.
Yeah, that's good. I didn't think about that. You're right. That's good.
Yeah, but in the meantime, it's still a pretty solid release, and I could totally understand why people love it. I just don't think I could, at this point in time, recommend it to the enthusiasts. What I think would change that,
mess with computers,
for people who like to mess with, what would change my opinion on that would be if somebody that was really well respected did a complete audit of Linux Mint, the X apps, and went through it and said, okay, yeah, there's a couple of things, but it's safe to use. Then I think I would change my opinion. But some of the stuff I've seen in the course of this review, some of the stuff that to me seems to indicate a deeper, pervasive, philosophical way of managing a system, which would indicate it's probably throughout the entire system, has really kind of cooled my enthusiasm. I had a real roller coaster ride with this. Started unimpressed because my display didn't work. Got super impressed. Really started to like it. Really started to love it, and then ran into the security issues and was really disappointed. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. linuxactionshow.reddit.com. Just leave some feedback for episode 426. And that is the Linux Action Show's review of Linux Mint 18. And that brings us to the end of this week's broadcast. But before we get out of here, we got some feedback to go through, and Noah's got a war story to share on the show, which I think I know the ending to, but I'm not quite sure. And before we get to all of that, I want to mention the great folks over at System 76, creators, designers, perhaps you could even say parents of machines born to run Linux. These are machines that run Linux out of the box. You don't have to fight or fuss with nothing. It's a great experience. It's the kind of experience that if you were going to convert someone to Linux and want to make sure that they didn't have any problems, this is the machine you'd give them, which turns out makes a great workstation for you when you want a nice, reliable system that you can comfortably upgrade. Also, we've been talking about Mr. Dominic from Coder Radio all episode this week. Well, look at this one. The Ratel Pro just came in. And when you buy a machine over at System 76, you should tell them something special. What should you tell them, Noah?
You should tell them that I switched you to Linux, and that's why you're buying a machine. She sent me a message, and apparently just on Wednesday alone, she had already gotten a bunch of people that have written into her and said, "Hey, by the way, Noah switched me to Linux, and I want to order a computer." So, and she'll send you something special. So there's something in it for you too.
Yeah, even if you already run Linux, just say Noah switched me to Linux, and he said you'd send me something special.
I know. No, that will incur. Then they'll say I'm cheating.
All right, don't let them know you're cheating. Okay, so I can't wait to hear about Michael's Ratel Pro on the Coder Radio program. He just picked one up to make it his Linux workstation. They're surprisingly compact. You can still fit a full-size graphics card in there, but they're surprisingly compact. The Ratel Pro, built right here in the US of A. Lots of great desktops and laptops from System76.com. We got 2 emails sent into linuxactionshow@jupiterbroadcasting.com. First one comes in from Warren Y. On feedback on 425 on trusting Microsoft, he said in that bit about Skype's announcement that would be coming later that day, you reiterated the stale distrust about Microsoft. The bit that got me to write the talk is cheap comment. The thing is, now it has actions. GitHub.com/Microsoft. I see 40 pages of open source projects there. What more did you want from them? Are you going to keep on this until they open source absolutely everything? No. I saw how that worked already. A bunch of people in the Linux community continued to distrust Sun after they opened absolutely everything too. Your thoughts, Noah? That seems like a response to you.
So first of all, as far as when will I start trusting Microsoft? Well, let's start with this. I have had to endure 15 plus years of Microsoft screwing over their end user to make a buck. So when we get to 15 plus years of them providing valuable software that help their users with their users' best interest in mind for 15 years, at that point, then maybe we can talk. But if you want to know what has to happen today in order for me to trust Microsoft, and I'd be interested to hear your opinion on this too, Chris, I want them to hurt in some way for the benefit of the Linux community. Take some step that costs a significant amount of money. Port Microsoft Office, not just the web version, an actual version. Hire a bunch of developers and spend some blood and sweat to get Microsoft Office to run on Linux. I wouldn't use it, but there are people that would. That would be an example of something they could do to bring Skype. Actually make a real Skype version. Don't just make an Electron app, wrap a web version inside of a thing and send it over to Linux. Hire some dedicated Linux developers and show that you have an invested interest in Linux so far, so good, to the point that neither Chris and I can sit here and say, well, they're actually just doing this because they want to get it on Chromebooks, or they want to do. Show me that you have interest in Linux and in the community, and not just this is a source of revenue for us in this way, so we're going to do it. If Linux happens to be it, then so.
So here's where I think the root of your "I want them to hurt in some way" comment comes from. Is the reason they are now embracing open source, using heart emojis, and shipping on Linux is that's what makes them profits. Microsoft made a profit decision. Microsoft, as any responsible public company that has board members that expect these things from them, made decisions that are better for them profit-wise because the market conditions changed. So their motivations for getting into open source weren't to better a particular open source platform or ideology. You could argue that about any company's motivations, including Red Hat, but here's where I think it prevents people from trusting them. Is the moment that the Microsoft Corporation determines that it is better for them to close something up and own it completely behind a wall again, because that's the more profitable solution, they will make that decision immediately. Let's just go crazy just as an example. Let's say over the next 10 years, every other cloud hosting provider, Rackspace, Amazon, Linode, DigitalOcean, GoDaddy, everybody that's in the hosting game is dwarfed by Azure. Let's just say that Microsoft has managed to create such a compelling product at such a reasonable price point with such great et cetera, that they have owned the virtualized cloud hosting market. If there was a move they could make at that point to change something so that everybody was locked into using Azure at that point, they would make it immediately. They would have no qualms about making that choice. And that's why some of us can't fully trust them, because they're going which way the wind blows them. And at the moment, the wind is blowing them this way. Now, will that moment be 5, 10 years? Potentially. But some of us are looking at this with 20, 25 years of experience with this company and have lived next to this company their entire lives. That would be me. Have family members and friends that have worked there for our entire lives, have watched them, have been on campus many times, have been offered jobs by them several times, have a pretty good insight to how they function as a company. And for those of us who have that perspective, it's particularly hard. That doesn't mean you don't take advantage of the technology they present when they at the time. And if the code's open in GPL or MIT or whatever it is, we can still use and take advantage of it. But they are simply at
40 of those projects that are apparently on GitHub.
They are at this point posting on GitHub because that's the way the market winds have blown them. And we're happy they're there, but there's no guarantee that's where they'll stay. Markets change, industries change, and Microsoft will change with it to make a profit. I don't see Red Hat making those same compromises over the years. Red Hat seems to be on a pretty steady course. Same with many other open source companies. So that's, I think,
well, and Red Hat has gone on the line to exemplify that they care about making a profit, as any good company should. There's nothing wrong with that, but they also highly value the community and the Linux user base. If you'd like to know more about that, just go look at all the employees that are at Red Hat that are using their own freaking product rather than Microsoft Windows, which is literally the business standard on the desktop everywhere else. So, yeah.
Okay.
You said it much more succinctly than I could have.
Number 2 comes in, and I don't think, because we had to switch paste services, I don't think we got a name on this one. So we'll go with Jedediah. Jedediah writes in with 2 questions. Number 1, I'm running Linux Mint 18 as a media center PC connected to a TV. I've disabled the screensaver completely, but under power management settings, I set the screen to turn off when inactive for 1 hour. My TV has an auto shutdown feature that powers off the unit if there's nothing going on. I like the setup because I can walk away from the media center. The display will automatically shut off after 90 minutes, which is I guess that is pretty cool. But if I'm watching The Big Show, YouTube, or Netflix in Chrome, the system does not recognize that I'm playing video, so the screen will turn off 1 hour into a movie or Netflix. I tried caffeine and a few other scripts that are supposed to disable the screensaver when a browser is playing video, but it doesn't seem to affect power options. Any suggestions? Unfortunately, man, uninstall the X screensaver if you can. I mean, really.
Yeah. So this is actually a piece of feedback we covered the other week, and the apparently in the pasting of the pastebin, it cut off the actual response that I was trying to get. But that is exactly what a second viewer wrote in to say was uninstall X screensaver, restart, and then that problem should go away. And I didn't know how to answer that last week when he wrote that in.
Yeah, I've been there with KDE too. And so, so is his question answered then?
I think so.
Good.
I think you just answered it.
Good, very good. Well, that was easier than I thought. So I wanted to get a little war story from you. So you have a confession to start with, and then a war story.
What's my confession?
I mean, I don't want to have to out you, but
welcome to BSD Unplugged.
You installed a BSD device, didn't you?
For all week as I'm hosting shows, a couple of different times I talked about how anytime I've installed FreeNAS, I've never really had to touch it. I just install it and just leave it. In fact, on TextNav, we went into that at some great length, and I talked about how I never touched the machines, and they're actually even hacked together machines that I didn't even really put any thought into, and they continue to run, and that's how great FreeNAS is, and that's why I like FreeNAS. Well, turns out at the beginning of the year, I decided I was going to take some time and plan out the perfect file server, so I would not have to worry about
I've been there. Been there. Mm-hmm.
Picked out the right motherboard, picked out the case I wanted, researched the heck out of drives, and I was migrating off of a FreeNAS box that and I'm not kidding when I tell you this is a hack together box. I mean, I took a server that was already functioning as a different purpose, took it out of production after like 2 years, and it was sitting there, and I went to Best Buy, bought the cheapest hard drives I could, threw them in there, and it ran for like 6 years. I never had a problem.
As an IT pro for years, you know what a great idea that is for your file.
Yeah, I knew it was a horrible idea, but it was one of those things. It was a monster that grew up inside of me. I was just going to test FreeNAS, and then I put a couple files on it, and then I started putting a couple movies on it, and before it just got away from me. Before I knew it, I had terabytes of stuff on there, and I was like, now this is a huge part. So I buy all these drives, I get everything set. I read the little FreeNAS manual to get everything set up right, and I'm super happy.
How long ago is this?
January.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so in January.
Okay, so my FreeNAS experience is about a year, 2 years out of date. We do have a FreeNAS in production here, but it just runs. So you have a different experience with FreeNAS where I do, because this is already sounding a little different than what I ran into.
So brand new machine, brand new hard drives, FreeNAS is installed, everything is great, and I have it on a 10 gigabit link from the file server over to the switch, and then my lab has a 10 gigabit link back,
so
and
this
then there's
is serious setup here
for everywhere else. So everything is great. Well, I noticed the other night I go to copy a file and it just fails. Well, that's weird. So I restart FreeNAS and the file is copying, but my file speed just tanks down to like 20 megs a second. I'm like, that should not be happening. So I go downstairs to my workstation, my 10 gigabit link, and I try and copy, and it just tanks again. And I'm like,
that's got to be that's a server side issue.
Well, so I Google a little bit, and first I'm thinking it's probably Samba, because before I was using NFS and now I was using Samba, so it could accommodate all these little media players. And I'm like, yeah, Samba sucks. Windows screwed it up. That's the problem. And I Google it, and turns out a bunch of people are saying maybe it's a failed hard drive.
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right.
Hold on, stop right there. I got to defend Samba for a second. If you're actually if you're communicating Samba client to Samba server, it's actually a very good, sophisticated protocol. Yeah, it actually is superior in some ways to how Windows clients communicate. So actually, for Linux to Linux, Samba is totally legit.
It's why I switched from NFS. So I do a little bit of digging, and I find a bunch of errors in the screen itself. So I send a screen cap to Alan, and I said, "Hey, Alan, you're the BSD guy, and I'm having these problems. Is this anything that you would be worried about?" And he goes, "Click on the alert, see if you see any alerts thing." So I go back and I look at the alerts, and sure enough, it says that there's a problem. One of the more of the devices is, wrong screen. Oh. But so I ask him, and I say, what's going on? And I said, should I be concerned? And he goes, run zpool status-v, get the full message. So I give him the whole message, and he goes, yeah, that's okay. It's just ZFS saving you from bit rot. He'd recommend running scrub and then rerun the data in the background, but everything is safe. You can keep using your drives. Your drives are not failing. Everything's fine. I'm like, oh, good.
Okay, good.
Everything's going. Yeah, that's good. So I run the scan again, and I get even more errors than I got the first time. So I message him back, and I said, yeah, so this is I reset the counters, but it's still happening, and so he gets back to me and says, yeah, this is definitely a problem. You're going to have to end up replacing that drive. And I'm like, well, what is involved with that? Because I've never had to do this before. I have like 8 FreeNAS boxes that I've deployed, never replaced a drive before. And he's like, it's super easy. You power the machine down, you stick the drive in, and you power it back up. And everyone that I had talked to after that, I said, this is what Alan tells me is going to happen. I'm a little skeptical. Well, turns out I power the FreeNAS box down. I open the drive bay up and pull the drive bay out because I put hot swap drives in it because I planned. Put the new drive in. I stuck the new drive in. I closed the bay. I started the FreeNAS box back up. I logged into the web interface. Under tasks, it said replace drive. I clicked the button and I waited. And about 5 minutes later, my drive came back online. Yeah. And shortly after that, I got the message saying it was being resilvered, and today it is running flawlessly like nothing ever happened. And it's like, I was shocked at how I set my whole Friday aside to be home working on that,
expecting to go south.
It ended up taking like 10 minutes. Like, it was great. So if you need I love Linux. I'm a big Linux guy. I run Linux on my laptop, but if you need a file server, man, go with BSD. Just use FreeNAS. FreeNAS is the best file server ever.
And it's backed by IX, and they are advertiser on other shows, but not an advertiser on this show. And I just respect the hell out of that company, and I respect the hell out of the people that work there, and I respect the fact that they are paying some of the FreeNAS developers to work there at IX and keep that going. Also, maybe I'll just mention really quick, ZFSbook.com. ZFSbook.com is Alan Jude and Michael Lucas's book they created together, FreeBSD Mastery. And specifically, this is the second one, and Alan has made it clear that there are a couple of FreeBSD specific things, but if you understand the counterpart commands in Linux, the stuff this book covers is applicable to Linux as well, he says. So that's you can check it out at zfsbook.com, and it's a bunch of really great advanced ZFS stuff. There's actually 2 books now, and it's crazy cheap. If you want, you can get like the ebook for like $2 or $3 or $2.99. Yeah, the ebook is or print. No, that's print. $2.99 for print, and it's available also on Gumroad, so you can get a no DRM version. In 3 different formats, so whichever is best for your e-reader, or you can get the print version. So that's CFS Book, and it's written by our very own Alan Jude and his co-author, Michael Lucas. You know, one thing you mentioned FreeNAS, and you gave it a real solid endorsement there, and that's what we're using here in production too. If I had a bit more, either if I was a little more reckless, or if I just had more faith in ButterFS, I would be really, really tempted by Rockstore. Rockstore looks to be a really nice Linux-based, ButterFS-powered NAS solution. I really like it.
What's the advantage of getting away from FreeNAS? The only thing I ever had before against FreeNAS was I could never pull the drives out and plug them into my Linux box, and now I can even do that. So I have I have zero motivation to move away from FreeNAS.
The problem with FreeNAS is that I am just not the best candidate for FreeNAS, and I don't really use BSD enough to just run a straight-up BSD server with a huge ZFS array. So you will immediately break your FreeNAS rig the moment you start poking around underneath the hood. And you should not do that. And they have taken precautions to help prevent damage. But the plugin system is really the only supported way to load and run software on a FreeNAS rig. My core issue is to build a really great FreeNAS system to make it really fast to handle the data speeds we need. It just ends up being a killer box. And at that point, I have so much spare compute and RAM when it's not doing much that I want to use it for other tasks. And if I try to install something that's not available as a plugin, I will break the FreeNAS installation. It will.
Gotcha.
So for me, having something that's
as an appliance, yeah.
Right, and then you're great. Like if you treat it like you would an appliance, like you might like a Netgear or like a ReadyNAS. No, what's the other one? Like another popular one is Qnology. Yeah. Then you're going to be fine, and you might even just consider going that route. But for me, if it's possible, if it's Ubuntu or Debian or CentOS under that hood, and maybe I could install something like Docker, or maybe I could install one daemon. I just having
my file server is too important. I'm okay having $2 or $3 grand tied up in a box that all it does is host. That does not bother me at all.
That works well in a business capacity, but personally, I can't really afford to do that. So that would that's how we've implemented. The FreeNAS is a standalone rig, and that's what it does. And it doesn't run. It doesn't even run a single plugin. It just exposes NFS storage to our virtual environment and runs a Samba daemon. And it runs like that for more than 2 years, and it's almost damn near 95 degrees out, and that's in that garage right now. And it's not the first year it's been through those conditions, and it still runs like a champ. And they've done a great job setting it up. I have the FreeNAS Mini, and it's just been amazing. So I agree. But personally, for myself at home, I can't afford to buy a $1,000 FreeNAS and a machine powerful enough to do real-time encoding and decoding of media that I need like my home server to do. So it has to be one box for me, and then that brings it into a whole other set of requirements because I can only afford one box. And for me, then I want a Linux system that I can manage properly, that has software available for it the way I want it, and that has all of the user tools. And maybe that for me is just a straight up, Linux install, and it's not a pre-built distro. I love these pre-built distros though because they can make some things really simple, like single-click activation of a media server or something like that.
Yeah, well, not just that, but man, I tell you what, if I would have hosed it, if I had to dig in and start trying to figure out how to from the command line replace, disattach a storage from a volume and then replace that and then resell and do all that. I mean, I don't know exactly what's all involved with that, but oh my God, was it nice to plug the drive in, click a button, and go. I didn't know what to do with myself.
You want straight up reliable storage, and the plugins. There's like a bunch of great plugins for FreeNAS. If you want something that's rock solid, the nice thing that they have there is ZFS is just a super great file system. They've made it crazy easy to use. And IX has FreeNAS developers and ZFS developers and TrueNAS developers who are shipping this to thousands of customers on staff, and that's the knowledge going into creating that product. And if you the problem is I can't think of another Linux NAS distro that can compete at that level, because that's a unique competitive advantage that FreeNAS and IX has that pretty much nobody else has, unless some other major storage vendor came out and launched a big product like that. And then they'd still be years behind as far as community involvement. And again, they have core developers on their staff that are paid full time, and they get to work on that product. You can't beat that for your storage.
I was a FreeNAS user and advocate before Friday, but it'll be a cold day in hell before you pry me off of a FreeNAS box at this point.
Yeah, and I think the next time we go with another storage upgrade here, it'll likely be FreeNAS. In the meantime, for my home setup, I might look at some other solutions. I might tinker around, and if I do something like that, I'll report back here on the show and give you guys a review. Because, like I said, like we just illustrated, there's definitely different use cases for different setups, and there's sometimes, you know, my version is maybe more matching some of the people that are just creating something at home, where Noah's is where you're representing something for your business. I'm walking both lines.
You definitely learn more. I don't know anything about what happened. I mean, I didn't learn anything from
right, like because there's all ZFS commands happening in the background that is doing all that.
And here's the other part too. It went well for me. If it didn't go well for me, I would be hosed because I have no idea what it's doing.
That is my other. That is so. See, my FreeNAS story where I've had a failure, because the current FreeNAS machine has never had a failure, but the one I custom built, I had 2 drives die at once on me. And the UI didn't even have the bring back online option that you clicked like that. I don't even know if the fundamental ZFS tool on the command line existed at the time. And so it was an entirely different scenario. It was build a new pool, set up the new drives, move my data over at the astonishingly bad copy. You talked about 20 megabits or 20 megs a second. If you keep pushing it, like when you have multiple drives that have died, I was lucky to get 8 megabytes or 2 megabytes when I was migrating off that thing. It was a brutal problem.
At least your data was there.
Yeah, I did get my data. Yes, absolutely. But the thing was, is because I didn't fully understand the core FreeNAS system, and not all the tools were available via the GUI, and I was a total ZFS noob because this is like 2 years ago. I felt very vulnerable. I didn't have any power over my data. It was very, because like it was precious stuff that I wanted to get off there. And I kept thinking, if this was a Linux box, see, because it's not even a full free BSD environment on FreeNAS. It's a slimmed, so some of the tools like package management and stuff don't exist. And so if you ever have to get into that FreeNAS installation, it's doable, and there's probably more documentation now, but you are not with a bunch of tools. Where if it was a standard minimal Linux installation, I felt like when it comes to my data, I could be like, a data archaeologist. I could break into the system through a cheroot off of a live boot and mount the file system and install rsync using apt-get and rescue my data. And I have a path to, and that's where
This right here is exactly what you're talking about is why I was hesitant with FreeNAS prior to Friday, was because everything I know about how to recover data doesn't apply because it's BSD. Exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But if they're going to give me a system that is so intuitive that I don't even have to get that far into the troubleshooting process, that I click a button and everything just comes back online.
Well, the thing is, they just keep making it a better product too. They have a lot more tools exposed through the GUI, and they keep iterating on it, and they have a lot of experience. So it just does keep getting better, and that's why I still even after that experience, I still got my data. I was able to rebuild, and the way the imaging works on FreeNAS, I reloaded the FreeNAS instance. Reconnected the storage, named the shares the same thing, and it was like nothing had ever happened because everything in the ZFS array was still the same permissions, the same data. It was I flipped a switch and no one noticed. I just completely changed out the file server. It was impressive, and so because I managed to get my data, and because it's even better now than it was back then, when people ask me, and I feel awful because we never answer this question on the show because I feel so bad. We get questions: what NAS software should I use? I'm always like, FreeNAS. Use FreeNAS, and I want to be able to say Rockstar.
I'm not embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed about it anymore. I'm gonna be the hardest core FreeNAS advocate ever after this experience. The thing is, I did everything right. I researched the drives. I was telling Rikai, he thinks this is a superstition. I think there's some validity to it. I started working on this back in like July and August when we bought our new house, and I bought the drives a couple months apart because I wanted them to be from different batches, so that if they had a bad batch, it was recommended to me that if they have bad batch of drives, then all your drives don't fail at one time because you bought them from.
That is really planning it out.
Well, you name it, I did it. I mean, there was nothing. I had the hard drives, temperature sensor things. There's nothing more I could have done to plan this thing out. And I mean, you get bit by a hard drive failure, there's nothing you can do about it. But
the fact you didn't lose data, right?
I was just, exactly. I was just so, and the other thing is too, is my wife is watching a TV show that she's been wanting to get into. And so she's sitting at home, like drilling into this. And all of a sudden, like, I'm like, I have to keep telling her I have to pause because I gotta restart.
Whoa, what happened to local media, bro?
It's on the file server, but it's local,
okay.
But local in my house.
Okay.
But the cool thing was, even in its degraded state, she's still watching Star Trek and still moving stuff over.
Oh, that's what she's watching. I love it. Is she loving it? Is she loving it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I can't talk to you. I totally can't talk to you about it.
Good. I'm glad because, that to me, it's like there are some bad episodes. And if you caught those, you would, I don't know, you might get the wrong impression.
She's going through the whole TOS in before that movie comes out in 8 days or whatever.
That's really smart because
some episodes,
those movies constantly call back to TOS, so you don't have to watch
70 some episodes.
It's a shame that it's only 70, to tell you the truth. It's a damn shame, and I respect her to do that because the first season is really good TV if you get past the technical limitations of the 1960s. The second season begins to fall off, and the third season, with the exception of like 2 or 3 episodes, is real bad. But it's such good basis to have for the rest of Star Trek. Anyways, we should probably wrap that up. That brings us to the end of this week's episode of the Linux Action Show. If there was something you didn't hear us talk about, like, why didn't these guys mention this? linuxactionshow.reddit.com. Submit it there. We also have the feedback thread where we'd like to get your feedback. Open source projects we should talk about, another great place to put it. Linux Action Show at jupiterbroadcasting.com is where you email, or go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/contact. In fact, why not just go right to the chat room and join us live on a Sunday? Go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar to get the live time converted to your local time, and then join us at jblive.tv. We've got local embedded streams. We've got links that you can copy and throw into MPV or VLC and watch in a desktop app. And we're even broadcasting on YouTube, which has 240p resolution, which I used when I watched a little bit of last week's Linux Action Show Live. It's really nice to have that scaled down resolution, and rumor has it, a little birdie tells me that our main scale engine stream will have that feature too, and you can check it all out at jblive.tv. He's at Kernel Linux. I'm at Chris LAS. Thanks so much for tuning in this week's episode of the Linux Action Show, and we'll see you right back here next week. Have you looked at how you formatted that Runs Linux line in the world's largest podcast to go in the show notes for the podcast that's seen by the largest Linux audience? Have you looked how you formatted that Runs Linux line? How drunk were you last night when you wrote that? Okay.
I ended up drunk, but I didn't get home from work till like 3 a.m. I had something to do.
For's Fusion, and the capital R, capital U, lowercase n, capital S, Linux, all uppercase, on a Raspberry Pi. For's Fusion.
There's an answer for this.
Okay.
Answer for this. What it is. What it is do you ever have that time? You know how you asked me, you're like, do you ever run Linux? And I'm like, yes, I have one. Well, immediately after that, I forgot what it was I had found. And so I spent like the rest of the weekend trying to think what it was. So I'm in my car and I'm driving home from work, and I remember what the Runs Linux is. So
you're doing it, yeah, I see.
On my laptop, I'm like, oh, Runs Linux, and then I just kind of like pasted the link, and I'm like, I'll fill out everything else later. Notice there's no description underneath.
Yeah.
I never went back to fill everything out later, at which point I would have recorrected the Runs
I'm like,
Linux.
He misspelled Ford, so he's probably, something's going on.
In fact, I don't know if you watched last week's but I actually said, I'm like, so here's the thing, we're going to say here's the news.
No, you got to quit screwing around. We got to start the show.
Thank you.
What's your preference for breaking it down?
You know, the problem is, like, I don't have a ton of, I don't like Mint. I guess is
that is a problem. Yeah, that's a good outtakes there, Rikai.
I installed it just so I could do the review, but like there's nothing here that would even remotely.
Really?
I don't like Cinnamon. I don't I don't particularly like the fact that it's like this is even too.
I feel like you should save this for when we're recording.
Yeah, I should. That's why I didn't say anything.
It's interesting. I had a different opinion. So that'll be good. Oh, I had 2 technical things I wanted to tell you about that happened to me that were kind of bad that I don't think we could have ever guessed. I fantasized too, although I didn't know you were flying around the nation like a maniac. Like I thought about when you got done with TechSnop on Thursday.
It was only once.
Right, but so there was a point, like say you didn't have to fly anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
There would have been a point where you got done with TechSnop on Thursday and you wouldn't have had a show until Sunday.
I know. Rakayo and I were going to drive out and do that box thing that we were talking about.
So I fantasized about what it would be like to do my job where the only thing I did was do the shows and I didn't do any of the other job stuff that I do. And man, that was like, wow, I was like super jealous of you. I was like, he doesn't have anything to do until Sunday. Like that is like, I got all like jelly. And then of course it turned out you were putting fires out.
But holy cow, dude. That was, man.
So
that was the most action Noah has had in 3 days in a long time.
Yeah. 2 technical things just real quick before we start the show, but I don't know how we could have foreseen these. And dude, the first one threw me for a loop like nothing. I've already told the story, I think, on Tech Talk today. But so I'm driving down the road, and you're only in studio for 1 day, and I'm driving down the road, and a Thursday was one of the days we were doing one of our long hauls because we're trying to make it back by Saturday. And so that was the day we were burning through a lot of podcasts. You go through podcasts quick in like an 8-hour drive. And I'm driving down the road, and it's hard to even take... So the RV has no return to center steering. So like you drive like an old 1950s car, you drive like this all the time. Yeah. Which means you can take one hand off the wheel and kind of like, but it's really hard. And I'm driving... And I have the phone over by me, so Hadia can't even, mess with it for me like she normally would, because I was trying to move it around in a new position. I'm driving along, and my podcast stops playing. I look at my watch. Did I accidentally bump my watch? Didn't hit pause there. No, my watch is still asleep. So I hit play. It starts playing. The playback countdown starts, but I don't hear any audio. I pull down my notifications tray, and I see Pocket Casts with its play controls and the podcast I'm listening to indicating that it's playing, and I see Spotify. And I see Spotify is playing. But I don't hear any music. So I pause Spotify. I start and restart Pocket Casts. Okay, now I hear Pocket Casts, and I start driving again. And I'm driving. And the podcast pauses. I pull down the notification tray. It still shows that the Pocket Cast is playing, but now it also shows the Spotify's playing. So I pause Spotify. I launch. I bring up the the application switcher. I force close Spotify, and I quit. Force close Pocket Cast. Relaunch Pocket Cast. Play it. Listen to my podcast. I'm driving down the road, and my podcast stops. And I'm like, what is going on? And I realize what's happening is the cloud has connected all of my Spotify devices, and you must have been like on the pre-show or something trying to play music in Spotify.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was launching Spotify on my Android device, and even though I wasn't listening to the audio on my Android device for whatever stupid reason, it was killing all my audio on my Android device, and when it would play in here. And it took me a couple seconds to realize what was going on. And so then I was like, oh, now I'm probably messing Noah up. So then I was just like, well, I just won't listen to podcasts for a while.
No, it didn't. Yeah, it didn't mess anything up. It just but that's hilarious. Yeah, that's exactly.
Well, I thought maybe when I paused it, I might have stopped it on your side because it's like a universal remote thing.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. But so there was that one, which isn't, that was like
Alan really likes it when I play music anyway. So
I couldn't figure like what was going on at first. Like what is going on? And then the other one that was sort of mildly like, oh yeah, that's obvious. You see, I normally initiate the hangout session with you. Right. But apparently, I think you initiated it this direction, like to the studio, and so Hangouts was ringing like a son of a bitch on my phone for like 15 minutes. I'm getting like a Hangout call.
Oh my god!
And I was so tempted to answer, be like, "What's up?" But I didn't. I figured you guys were troubleshooting or something.
If it was the first Sunday, you would have probably got next live and then hung up on. But the I think it was that Sunday, or maybe it was the other one. Maybe it was it was that Sunday. I sent a link to Wes. And it was supposed to come up in the Hangouts window, and he's like, it's not coming up. So I pasted it again, and then I just got mad, and I was like, Control V, Control V, Control V, Control V. And then when I got done, I looked, and there was like 40 of them, and then it dawned on me, I'm like, geez, I wonder if that sent notifications to his phone.